Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our webinar. I see we have around 35 people joining us. Welcome. Before we start, we do ask that we will be using the chat function today. So please open up your chat function and to please select to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see each other's answers. And if you have questions, we can all read it together. As part of this webinar, we do ask that you grab a pen and paper with you for an activity that we will be doing later. And let's now start. I'll hand you over to Denver.
Right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar, Growing P&Cs through Valued Roles. So my name's Denver de Cruz, and I'm the General Manager of Inclusion Solutions. A little bit about me before we get underway. I moved to Perth in 2008. I've been in the community sector for about 20 years now. And I moved here because it's a great spot to live. I love Western Australia and always have done. And primarily, I guess I wanted some better weather, great beaches and some good people to hang around with. So I moved here back then, and my personal interests and hobbies are sport and recreation, music. I love traveling, although we can't do much of that at the moment. And I also love anything that involves DIY. So being hands-on and handy in the shed is definitely in my interest zone. So a bit about you, Jehu.
Thanks, Denver. My name is Jehu. I'm one of Inclusion Solutions Inclusion Consultants. So Denver is our big boss. A bit about me. We moved to Australia. My family and I moved to Australia from the Philippines about 8 or more years ago. And one of my biggest interests at the moment is Filipino food. I mean, if you want me to come anywhere with you, all you have to do is offer me food and I will be there. I'll hand you guys over now back to Denver.
Thanks, Jehu. Nala Kadich, Wajak Mort, Kayan Kadak, Nijabuja. As an organisation, it's incredibly important to us to acknowledge the traditional custodians and owners of the land on which we meet today. I'd wish to pass my respects on to elders, past, present, and future. So let me start off by telling you a little bit about Inclusion Solutions. As you can see, we work with sporting clubs, community groups. We work with about 60 local governments across Australia each year. We do a lot of work with state sporting associations, schools, and businesses. And essentially, our role is really to build the capacity of communities to be inclusive and welcoming of all people. And when we talk about inclusion, we talk about all minorities, we talk about all people right across the board. So specifically, I guess, how do we do this? We work right across the community delivering workshops. So I think last year we delivered about 120 workshops right around the country. We mentor clubs, so specifically sporting clubs, community groups, and so forth. We do a lot of professional development, so that could be one-on-one. But also that could be as a group, as a local government, or as an organisation as well. Inclusion Solutions is really an asset-based organisation. So we utilise the notion of asset-based community development to really engage people within the community and not to replicate what already exists. That's really important to us. And we do a lot of work around the consultation processes with local governments and communities as well. And we have a number of specialist projects as well, which sees us working with the likes of Cricket Australia to change culture right across the country, but also with the world's largest sporting club, Manchester United Football Club as well. So that's a little bit about us. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we're talking about today. So the webinar, the content for the webinar. We're going to be talking about inclusion. So inclusion is obviously a word that's a bit of a buzzword and has been for a number of years now. We're going to help you understand what inclusion actually is. We're going to talk about this theory of social role valorization. This is incredibly important, whether you're involved in the community sector, whether you run a P&C, but also just in your own lives day to day as well. Obviously, this webinar is all about valued roles. So we're going to touch on valued roles and how you can utilize the theory of valued roles to really engage with your community around you. And specifically, we want this to be really practical to you. So we're going to be giving you some tips to recruiting and to engaging your local community as well. As it says in the bottom of that screen, don't be frantic about, or don't worry too much about writing down notes and that sort of thing. We'll send through a full PDF of this straight after the webinar as well. So a couple of guidelines to help steer us in the right direction today. This is a safe space, so please respect the views of all people. listen and be open, I guess, and really, we really want your contributions throughout the process. It's very engaging, very, can't think of the word right now, but it's a two-way street as well. So we'll be using the chat function, as Jehu mentioned, and please be respectful of other views. And one thing we'd love you to do is also challenge us as well. Right at the end, we'll have a Q&A function as well, and we'll take a few minutes there to answer any questions you have. So if you've got anything that's burning and you want some answers around, or you want to share your thoughts around, we encourage you to also hang on to that question for that period as well. So I believe Jehu's got a question for us. Jehu, over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Denver. Now, in the chat function, I want you guys to tell us, what does an inclusive P&C look like to you? We'll give you a few minutes to answer this, so please feel free to participate and join the chat.
Now, while you guys are answering that, I know Jehu joined a community group, a culture club, not that long ago. So Jehu, could you tell us what, I guess, what that community looked like and why you believe that was inclusive?
So the club that I joined, their ethos was radically inclusive. So we welcomed everyone, whether you were from a Filipino background or an Australian background. We were just really open. I can now see actually that there are answers coming through. So Liz from Mount Hawthorne said that it is inviting to all members of the parent and community. We have someone from Kinross Primary, Margaret, said, all members of the community are welcome. Catherine said, representatives in the P&C from the whole school. So these are great answers. Now, Denver, why do we ask this question?
It's a really good question you have there, Jehu. I guess the reason why we ask this specific question is really around ensuring we understand what keeps people coming back. How we recruit people, but also how do we keep holding them and how do we keep making them long-term volunteers or long-term participants. If you're involved in sport and recreation, you'll probably know that there's a big notion around keeping people for a lifetime. So engaging them for a lifetime and engaging them early. And really it's highlighting that notion that it takes a lot more work to engage or to recruit someone for the first time than it does to keep them into the future as well. Great answers there, and I really loved some of those. So we'll come back to those a little bit later on. For now, I guess I'd like to pose this question to you. Sorry, apologies. What is inclusion? So we do a lot of work in this space, and I mentioned earlier that when we talk to people right across the country, the notion of inclusion comes up quite a bit. People call a whole heap of things inclusion quite often. Recently, there's a humongous federal grant that was called inclusion, but really the initiatives that were funded from it were very much of a segregated nature. So we've got to be thinking about this and we've got to understand what is inclusion. When we looked up the word and tried to find our own definition for it, we looked in all sorts of places, and probably the most powerful one that we came across was from a child who was 10 years of age, in primary school, in fact. And she stated, inclusion is the art of ensuring that all people feel welcomed and celebrated for exactly who they are. This means that all differences are viewed as unique gifts that an individual can offer a group or a community. And when we heard that from a child of 10 years of age, we thought, well, I don't think we need to look any further. That really sums up exactly what inclusion was. The next thing I'd like to talk about is one of the 5 key tenets of inclusion. So when we talk about inclusion, there are 5 key dimensions that we really focus on. And this is one of those, contribution. And this is really the center of the whole conversation that we're talking about today. It's our belief that we're a community broadly, sport, recreation, community groups and organizations are still focused when we recruit and when we keep volunteers. When we're talking about volunteers, we're really talking about what they can do for us. What we miss in this piece is really that notion that volunteerism can actually be quite a selfish act. People volunteer to give back, of course, but they also volunteer because it makes them feel good. So the sense of contribution is really integrally linked to this notion of volunteerism and staying connected to a community. The ability and freedom that it gives ourselves, whether that be contributions of time, money, help, support, or one for our personal or unique gifts. Really incredibly important. Now in the screen, you'll see 4 young ladies there. Mamta, who's second from right with the flag on her cheek. Mamta's an Indian lady that moved to Australia. She realised as a TAFE lecturer at Armidale that her whole community was very segregated, and the students that came along to her classes would very rarely integrate or mix and mingle with each other outside that classroom. So Mamta started a project called United in Diversity, and anyone that's probably from the Southeast Corridor might well have come across Mamta in her journey. Mamta focused on one particular thing, your sense of contribution. Yes, the Southeast Corridor is absolutely diverse, and there are many nationalities that are living in that corridor. But what Mamta said was we all have something to contribute to Australian society. Whether you're Indian, whether you're African, whether you have a disability, whether you're Aboriginal, it doesn't matter. This sense of contribution is actually what's going to bind us and what is going to keep us coming back. So I mentioned in the intro the theory of social role valorization. Now I'll take a stab and say from the past many workshops we've delivered that there might only be a handful out of our participants that have heard about this notion of social role valorization. Social role valorization sounds like a mouthful, and it is. It was developed by this gentleman in the screen, this young man called Wolf Wolfensberger. And really around, well, I guess what he wanted to do was he wanted to normalize difference. So he was working specifically in the disability sector at the time and really trying to find a mechanism or a framework that could ensure that people with disabilities are widely included and welcomed in community. Now, Wolf didn't know this at the time, I don't think, but his work has actually led to a whole heap of history that actually helps other people get engaged, other minority groups, not just people with disability. And it's as simple as this. Wolf believes that your valued roles or community-based roles often either open the door or close the door for you in your community. The notion of valued roles, so people that other people place value on, so things that other people place value on, are likely to open the door for you and have you welcomed. Things that are perhaps devalued roles, so it might be criminal, it could be dole bludger, if you like, or those things that I guess can have connotations in a negative manner, often get you excluded from community. So when you think about it, let's imagine we're at a Friday night and we're down at the cafe or a local bar. The first thing someone might say to you is, "Oh, hi, I'm Denver, tell me a bit more about yourself." Or, "What do you do with yourself?" And most people would respond by saying, "Oh, I'm Sharon and this is where I work," or "This is how I'm the president of a local club," or I'm a soccer player," or those things basically help me either ascertain or take social value away from that person. Now, this is something that we all do consciously and subconsciously. So if I met someone, and I went through this exercise in a workshop, I met someone and this young lad said to me, "Look, and he was probably all of 16 or 17 years of age, so a little bit younger than me. But he said, "Look, I love Star Trek, I love Star Wars, sci-fi," and in my mind, I was already thinking, I have no affiliation with this because they're things that I actually don't find an interest in. So the chances are, if that was a Friday night at a local cafe, I'd probably say, "Oh, that's great," and I'm going to move on to someone else who I have something in common with. So the notion of inclusion is actually really interesting because when we think about it in this context, it's really the things that we share, the things that we have in common that bind us and bring us together. So the work of Wolf was really about helping people of a devalued nature find valued roles in community. Now, a lot of our work at Inclusion Solutions is really built around this notion of helping people ascertain a valued role in their community. Now, it might be something that they don't even know they're good at or don't believe that they're extremely excellent at, but they can showcase that in their local community setting. So when we think about P&Cs, what are those roles that you have that maybe one person is doing 5 of them, 10 of them, 15 of them? How can you hand some of those roles over to someone else so that they can help build their social value in the eyes of others? It's a really good one to think about. And when you think about your own life and you find yourself having conversations with other people, you'll start realizing that a lot of our conversations are built around the socially valued roles that we either occupy or want to occupy, working towards. The benefits of valued roles. This is obviously far-reaching. The United Kingdom have actually launched a Minister for Loneliness. Now, this is incredibly important because social isolation is is really connected very closely to that notion of socially valued roles. So we need to understand that by providing these valued roles, there are plenty of benefits to individuals. So obviously, physical health, you're being out there, you're active, you're doing things, you're in the community. Mental health, incredibly, incredibly important. That sense of connection and contribution, the notion of Mamta and her getting people out of the woodwork in her community to contribute to other people, that's really important around the mental health space. Being part of something. You know, I've played cricket all my life. I go back to my club every year because actually it's not very little about the cricket these days. It's actually about that notion of sharing that journey with other people, and that's incredibly important. What Mamta spoke about, contribution, that sense that everyone in our community has something to give back to other people, incredibly important. The community, I guess, is really a better place to live. There's other elements to it around reduced crime, as an example, in particular, and we did a lot of work in Karratha in the early part of the last decade, and that was really around connecting youth to valued roles. And what we started seeing, what we wanted to do was really get them into clubs and community groups, and what we started seeing at the other hand was really a reduce in crime. And that project went on to win a crime safety award, even though the intent was actually nothing to do with crime or community safety. So really very much linked to that as well. Strong sense of belonging, that's what we all want, I guess. Being someone, in your local community, do you want to walk down the road and know that there are other people around? Other people care about you and invest in you. That notion of choice and control. When we think about our communities, there are so many cohorts, so many marginalised people in our communities that are actually not having the ability to choose what they want or control their own destiny. And that's really important. Offering them a valued role really contributes to that. Better connections, more friends, and obviously increase in confidence and skill sets and that sort of thing is really important. Now, we'd like to give you a really practical tool. So one of the key things that we think about and talk about with a lot of clubs in the work that we do is around actually utilising the existing membership. So clubs will often say to us, look, we don't have, we need more volunteers. We don't have people coming out of the woodwork. And one of the key things, one of the best places to start is who do you already have? And how do you use that asset base to build a better future? So on the next screen, I've got this notion of head, heart, and hands. Now, Jehu asked you earlier to grab a pen and paper, and hopefully you've all got one now. And what we'd love you to do is just scribble down under these three headings what you're knowledgeable about. So if you write down head and you say, I'm knowledgeable about whatever it is, it might be mountain bikes, it could be darts, it could be the disability sector, it could be anything, it could be a local community. The next one is heart. What are you passionate about? What do you care deeply about? Is it social justice? Is it connection? Is it sport? Is it, could be anything, ballet, absolutely anything. What do you care so deeply about? And the third one is hands. What are you good at? So if you're like me, I would absolutely say I'm good at fixing old lawnmowers because that's a passion of mine and I love getting my hands dirty and getting right in the middle of it all. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes there if you don't mind. And while you're scribbling that down on some paper, I might just ask Jehu a little bit more about what he's, I guess, knowledgeable, passionate, and skilled in. So Jehu.
Thanks, Denver. So head, I would say that I'm knowledgeable about Filipino culture. Being Filipino myself, I grew up in the culture. I know it very well. Something I'm also really quite knowledgeable about, my head, is throwing events and being organized. In our organization, I do help out with our social inclusion forums, planning that with one of our other team members. My heart, for example, things I'm passionate about is, as I mentioned earlier, good food. If you want me to go anywhere, again, all you have to do is serve food and I will be there. And hands, things that I'm good at doing. I'm really good at doing marketing. So with the clubs that I've joined previously, I've really taken on the role of their marketing coordinator or a social media person because that's something I know that I'm really, really good at. Once you've written down all your head, heart, hands, please share them in the chat function and we'd be happy to talk about them with you.
Absolutely love that notion of food being such a great connector. And I know that story I shared with you earlier around Mamta's story, United in Diversity, that's one of their critical elements that they have at every meeting. because it breaks down so many barriers so quickly. And I think absolutely I'm with you on that one, Jehu. Good food and really promotes good conversation for sure.
Oh, we have Clifton Hills. Sonia said that one of her knowledges is in autism.
Good one to be knowledgeable about. There's a changing world with autism and a lot of research being done right now around autism and its impact.
Ashburton, Amanda said that her head is medical, her heart is also medical, and for her hands, she said, helping fix people. That's an interesting one with hands. Don't you agree, Denver?
Definitely, absolutely right. Love to hear more about that at some stage.
Liz from Mount Hawthorne said head, talking. She's very chatty, she said. Her heart is environment and social justice. I think you and I have a lot in common, Liz. And her hands, she said maths, accounting, academic reading, and wanting to learn new things. From Port Kennedy, Julia said her head is being an older mom. Nutrition is something that she is very knowledgeable about. And her heart is her family and community. Her hands is she's really good at organizing social media. Joey said that his head is behavior management. I think that's also a really interesting one. His heart is inclusivity, and for her hands, cooking and hugs. So yep, people are, all the answers are still coming through. Kipanara said head is science, heart is environment, and then hands is cooking and gardening. A lot of cooks, don't you agree, Denver?
Absolutely. So if I was running a P&C and you guys were all my members, I guess I'd know very quickly out of this quick list how to build community. So I'd come to all the cooks in the group and say, what we're going to do is offer every one of you guys an opportunity to share your skills. What are you great at cooking? Tell us a bit more about it and bring that skill on a Tuesday, bring that skill on a Thursday, and so forth. Now, there are a few people there around gardening, music I'm looking at, crocheting, looking at this notion of connection and what people care about. I think you guys have done a fantastic job through this list that I keep looking at around building community. And quite often, I guess we really ask this question because of this, because community might be waiting to be engaged and we might not be able, or we might not be thinking about it in the right way. We might be thinking our answers are outside our doors. We need more volunteers. Whereas maybe we need to start from within. Maybe we need to ask our cohort, our membership, what they are knowledgeable about, what they care about, and what they're good at. Because that's a really great place to start this conversation. So, Jehu, I believe you have a question for us.
Yes, so moving on from that, in the chat function, I want you to tell us, what do you do to engage new members? Within your P&Cs and within your communities, how do you engage new members?
And while you guys are thinking about that and writing down in the chat function, I might just ask Jehu that with your culture club, Jehu, what does your club do to engage new members?
Ours is, our first event of the semester is always the karaoke night because that gets people in. And through that, we build conversation and we make sure that everyone's able to contribute. Now, someone said, Joey said that they offer wine. And then he said, just joking. Liz from Mount Hawthorne said that we share who we are and what we have been doing or are doing right now. Ken Ross said coffee meetups. I think I am a coffee addict myself, so that is something that I would most likely turn up to if I had children. Now, Denver, do you have any tips for us on how to engage new members?
Yeah, look, engaging new members is incredibly important. And I might take you back to a story very quickly. If a lady who just took over as the president of a cricket club, 750 members in the audience. And at the end of the season that she was taking over, she stood in front of the 750 membership and she had her head down and she said, look, it's really incredibly hard to get volunteers. You know, it's a thankless role. Please, we need more people to come out of the woodwork like that. I know 3 or 4 people that were in the audience on that day, and I got told this story, and I rang her and I said, hey, can we have a conversation? Can come in and I'll buy you a coffee and let's have a conversation about it. And I said, tell me about this response. You had 750 members in the audience. How many people came forward? And her response was, oh, incredibly surprising. No one came forward. And my response to her was, I could have bet my money on that. So let's have a conversation about this notion of engagement. You've got to build a community that people want to be part of. You know, Jay mentioned that notion of belonging. You've got to sell not the product, not the role, but you've got to sell that notion of connection, because it's what you have as a P&C is a vessel to connect people. You have the vessel to bring people together to strengthen their sense of belonging to their local community. Now, let me tell you about a play group, one particular play group. So I took, at the time, my 2-year-old daughter down to a play group. I won't mention which one, but I was really keen to get involved. And probably as a dad at the time, I had Fridays off and I thought I was a bit nervous. Yeah, it took a lot of guts for me to go down, because I knew primarily, I guess, from having walked past the playgroup in the past, that there were no other dads that attended. Now, I went down to that playgroup and I said, you know what, I'll give it a go. Not one person spoke to me. Not one other person engaged. I spoke to 3 people. They sort of answered my question but walked away. Didn't really make me feel welcome. So that notion of being welcoming, being engaging, and actually talking about that community is really, really incredibly important. Now, we're going to talk about the alternative approach, I guess, to volunteer roles at P&Cs. How would you like to fill them? And using knowledge, skills, and the passions is a really great way to engage your existing membership, but also to promote it outside that to your local community, to other parents and other people that might want to get involved as well. So, Jehu, before we go into this in depth, I believe you've got a question for us as well.
Thanks, Denver. So my next question for you is, in the chat function, if you could please tell us your experience of when you joined your P&C. How were you made to feel welcome? Did someone say hi? Did someone, greet you as you walked into the door? How were you made to feel welcome when you came in?
And Jehu, with the Culture Club, do you remember your first visit, and was there anything specific that stood out in your mind?
With my visit, the first thing that they did was they had a welcome desk. When I signed up, if I had questions, I was able to ask that to them, and it felt like a very welcoming place, because I believe some of my questions were a bit silly now looking back, but they were still happy to answer them. We have actually answers coming in now. So Jinjin DHS, Melinda said that the treasurer invited her to join, and that made her feel very welcome and included. Vivian from Cantem said, we usually have a section on our members form. They can write their experiences or strengths. Almost very similar to the Head, Heart, Hands. Don't you agree, Denver?
Absolutely, that's a great one.
Yeah. Port Kennedy Primary School, Julia Weston said, couple of lovely members, but my knowledge that they needed to change and that I had the confidence to bring the change drew me in. That's good, trusting yourself and trusting your ability. We have WACSSO Canning North said, I was made to feel welcome by being acknowledged by the members and said I would be making a difference. It's a really good answer, I think.
I love that answer. I absolutely love that answer, because it's investing both ways, and it's acknowledging actually what we spoke about earlier, that you have something to give to us, but we also have something to give to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read the last one. So WACSSO Northwest said, with all 3 P&Cs that I have been part of, both the school principal and the president all greeted me and made sure that everyone was comfortable to speak up.
Excellent. Some really great answers there. And I think one of the key things for me is also just as simple as remembering someone's name or asking their name and repeat it and making sure you introduce them to other people by their name as well. It sounds so simple, but it's incredibly important. So a few tips, I guess. Oh, it's doing it again. Oh, my apologies. Sorry guys, just bear with me 1 sec if you don't mind. Okay, so back to where we were. Personally welcome new families. This is incredibly important. I spoke about the playgroup that I went to. That was the one and only time that I went to it, and I lasted for about 45 minutes. I wasn't going to ever go back, and to this day, I've not gone back to another play group. And I guess I'm scorned by that. So when you think about someone of a minority group, when you think of someone who might have been excluded in the past, or who might have some element of perceived difference in the community, whether you have a disability, whether you might be from a cultural background that isn't the part of the majority and that sort of thing, it's incredibly important that we actually go out on a limb to welcome in new families, new individuals to that group. The next one is really around the B's of connection. And this is so super easy, and it's such a great tip that we can give you to really start the conversation. So starting off, be approachable. That means going out to people and actually being vulnerable yourself. Be present. When someone's talking to you, listen and hear with intent. Be empathetic. So if someone's pouring their heart out, and if I go to a second playgroup, I might be inclined to tell you the first experience that I had. So be empathetic and be understanding of that. Be open to connection. Think about yourself as a community connector. And that's incredibly important, because you might be hearing things that someone brings out that you might say, oh, hang on, I'll introduce you to someone with a similarity in our group. You guys would probably get on pretty well. You're off a similar walk of life, or you've come from a similar background, or whatever it is. That notion of connection is so important. And the other thing is be proactive. So it took me, out of that 45 minutes that I was at the playgroup, it probably took me half an hour of standing there by myself with my little one who was wrapped around my legs for me to think, okay, well, I need to have a conversation because no one else is going to come and chat to me. So be proactive in that conversation in the first instance, and you probably have a far better outcome. So tips to engage and recruit volunteers. Really what we want to talk about is that proactive approach to improvement. So what does that mean? Let's have a look a little about that. And Jehu, over to you for one more question.
Thanks, Denver. So in the chat function, please tell us, why do you volunteer with your P&C? What made you decide that you wanted to get involved, and not only that, but contribute your skills and talents? So answers are coming in right now. So WACSSO Wheatbelt South said that that person wanted to assist the community and children of the school that they were part of. Liz from Mount Hawthorne said, as I like to help people with what I'm good at and I have some time. Both great answers. Marmion Angie Roche said that it's because she saw that they needed change and that she was willing to help them do that. Ashburton Amanda wrote, because it helps the children, really great reason to volunteer and help out. Riverside P&C, Christy Wilkins said, to help the school be a better place, and I like to help. A lot of really people who really like to help and volunteer here. Now, Port Kennedy Primary School, Julia Weston said that she was disappointed that the P&C was not thought of well and was missing an opportunity to build community. So essentially, Julia Weston saw a gap in the community and she thought she was the one to fill it. Now, why did we ask this question, Denver? Do you have any answers for us?
We do. Yeah, it's a great question. So we asked this question, I guess, really to identify how we can get people to contribute, and also to help us understand that it's not necessarily about the roles that we're trying to fill. It's not about us. And let's take a minute just to digest that. So when we're thinking about volunteerism and we're thinking about increasing, retaining, attracting volunteers, what we've got to first realize is we've got to flip this whole script on its head. We've actually got to be thinking about the potential volunteer, and we've got to market ourselves in a way and market the roles that we have in a way that ticks their boxes for them, rather than being the president that I spoke about earlier and saying, look, it's a really tough job. No one really cares about it, but you know, we need people to come forth. 750 people and not one person stood up and said, that sounds like fun. Sign me up. Let's think about that. Why not? Who would put their hand up? I know I wouldn't. I've played cricket all my life. I love kids. I love cricket. There's no chance I'm signing up for something like that. But if you came forth and you did a head, heart and hands on your membership, of which I might be one of the 750, and you realise that I've got some skills in some specific areas, and you came to me and said, look, I recognise you've got this background. Would you give us an hour of your time on a weekly basis? Would you give us 2 hours a month? Would you give us 10 hours a year? Whatever that makeup is, assign me with something that I'm good at, I care about, I'm knowledgeable about or I can do, and I'm likely to say, absolutely, I'll come down. So it's a really, really important question, and we really want to reshape how we approach volunteerism. We've got to flip that script and really think about it from their point of view. What do they have to offer? What do they have to gain? And really focus in on addressing their problems or their gaps. So their problem might be that they're not connected, that no one has taken an interest in them, that no one knows about all of these other great skill sets that they have in the background. And our potential solution to that is really around, firstly, getting to know them, getting to know what they're good at and what they care about, and then helping join the dots between that and the available opportunity to fill the gap. Sell the sense of community. Sell the question that we asked before. Why do you come along? Why did you join your P&C? All of those great things. Sell those to the individuals that you're trying to recruit. So the last one I'd like to talk about is really the art of asking. So what is the art of asking? So we do a lot of work right around the country, and one of the individuals that we do a lot of work with up in Townsville is a gentleman called Rick Thompson. And Rick said, the deliberate and conscious act of approaching others and in doing so seeking an involvement that wasn't previously there is the art of asking. So how do you do that? What's the practical thing that you guys can take away with you that says, okay, I understand this notion of asking and I understand how I'm going to do it? So firstly, why? Simon Sinek, the great British and American poet and writer, spoke about this notion of understanding your why. Before you do anything in business, before you do anything in leadership, before you do anything in engaging anyone, understand exactly what you're trying to do, the purpose, and also understand what ideal outcome you're seeking. So what does a successful meeting look like? What does a successful conversation look like? What outcome are you chasing? And sometimes you don't need an outcome. Sometimes you might just be information gathering. You might be shooting the breeze, and all of that's great. But remember those little nuggets that might come back later on to build into an outcome. I guess the what, be specific. And this is probably where the president of that particular career club went wrong. We've just got these roles. We've got these roles, come forth and give of yourself, but I'm not going to tell you what those roles are. So be specific. What are you looking at? What type of role and why would the right person come forth so they can actually build that sense of connection, paint the picture for them? Who's the right person? And this could vary and I guess the one thing I'd say in this is have a really open mind around the who, because people that you might not expect to put their hand up might be the perfect person for you. And we give that notion, we do a lot of work in employment as well, of people with disability in particular. And one of the key things that organisations say to us is, our productivity will go down. Actually, what's been stated through disability-based employment is productivity, not just of the individual, but the rest of the team goes up. So understanding who is the right person in your context as a P&C is incredibly important as well. Being open-minded is really important. The when, where, and how. And I guess this is probably the part that you hit on. Once you gather that information initially, once you know what someone can give to your community, once you know what their skills are, once you know what they care about, then you can start really crafting and shaping this role. We did some work last year with the Reds up in Headland. It's a football club. And what they committed to do as a committee was 12 people on this committee. And they said, look, what we're going to do every month is we're each going to have a conversation with one person between committee meetings. We're going to get to know one person really well. And that might mean once a month, they just hit up a random person in their membership and say, would you like to go for a coffee? I've seen you around the footy club or whatever it is. And that's the list that they follow through this piece. They really work through that list, and what they've done within a year is increase momentum. Go the Headland Reds, absolutely. But I think they've gathered so much momentum so quickly there, and it all started through this notion of asking specific questions with really good intent. So I guess what I'd like to pose to you guys is questions. If you would like to use the chat feature, we'd love to hear some questions.
We also have the Q&A function. I can see that no question has been submitted yet, but as Denver mentioned, if you have any questions right now, we do have a bit of time, about 5 minutes to answer them. So please put them in the chat right now and I'll read them out to Denver.
So Jehu, I believe you had a question for me.
Yeah, so at the moment, Denver, what is the current state of volunteerism in Australia?
It's a good question. Since 2014, right across our country, so right across Australia, volunteerism has actually been in decline. Now, that's a really interesting concept to understand because population is obviously growing. People arguably are looking for connection more than ever before, yet volunteerism is on the decline. So I know Volunteering WA and Volunteer Australia and that sort of thing are doing some great work to combat that. But I firmly believe, and I was having a conversation on Tuesday with Sport Australia, the peak body for sport in our country, and we were talking in depth about that notion of sporting clubs operating the same way they have done for 30 or 40 years. They've not changed their approach to it, but communities have changed. So the other thing that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years is we're far more diverse than ever before. So when you start thinking about it, most sporting clubs, certainly the major sports back in the day, 5, 10 years, and probably today, have really pitched themselves at the majority or the mainstream, if you like. I hate that word, mainstream, but I use it to ensure that everyone knows what I'm talking about. So pretty typically, Anglo-Saxon, 15 to 50, and really that's the pitch for the majority. What we're realizing now is that the old majority is actually fast becoming a minority, but sport hasn't changed and adapted to that concept as yet. So it's really important that we start thinking, who are the other groups that can add value to community? Who else belongs in our community? And probably the one place I would start that is saying, what does my P&C look like? What does my club look like? What does my community group look like? And is that reflective of the local government? Is that reflective of our community around us? Starting to look at those statistics and then saying, actually, we don't have anyone of this ilk. Why not? We don't have any multicultural people. We don't have anyone with a disability. And it's actually incredibly important to find out that data, really easy to do. So if you Google your local government, so as an example, if it is Headland, you just Google Headland community statistics. Usually there's a profile ID feature that you can basically download all the statistics around and then look at that data in comparison to what you have on your group or committee.
So Denver, we did have a few questions come in. So
sure.
Liz from Mount Hawthorne said, or asked, how do we develop those skills? Sounds a bit difficult if we have never done these things before. Suggestions on how to develop and commit to doing these things as new change is difficult for me and so overcoming fears, etc.
Yeah, it's a really good question, that one. And I guess how to develop that skill comes down to what are you trying to achieve for me? So what are you trying to achieve? So if you've identified the gap, and Liz, it might be that your committee is all of a certain ilk and you don't have anyone, as an example, with a disability on that community, or that committee, sorry, you don't have anyone from a multicultural background. So that gives you your why. So if we go back to those questions around understanding your why, that can give you the starting point to basically have that conversation. Have an open and honest conversation around it and try and figure out why. So in your community, in WA, we've got about 18%, so nearly 1 in 5 people that have a disability. Now we know 1 in 3 or 30% of people are from a multicultural background. We know 1 in 5 experience mental illness. We know over 3% of the population are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders. We know roughly 11% of the population have some kind of diverse sexual orientation or are part of the LGBTI community. So all of those things are really easy to find out for your local community. And I'd be starting with that why, understanding your why and having a conversation, an open, honest conversation around why that's important as well.
We have a few more questions. So Nikki from Kipinara said, people always say they are busy. How do we sell volunteering to others who always say they are busy?
Yeah, I guess it comes down to that notion of head, heart, hands. And I use that notion, you're probably not going to go up to someone and say, oh, what do you care about? But have a conversation with them and distill in your head, what do people care about? What are they knowledgeable about? So someone who might be busy might say, look, I'm a lawyer, I'm doing this, I've got 3 kids. So you can start tapping into that information. So really understanding the individual in your membership or in your community that you're trying to engage, and understand those 3 things about them, because they are the motivating factors, and that's actually what's going to get you the hook. So rather than sell the organization or the role that you're trying to sell based on what you know, actually identify how that role correlates with that person that might be the mum of 3 kids who is a lawyer and works long hours. So what can she do? Maybe her role might just be to connect you with someone else or something like that. But it depends on each instance, I guess. But really, I would be saying use the theory of the head, heart, hands and understand your membership, but also understand how your role and how the role you want filled correlates with that person's interests or skills or knowledge. Great question.
time for one last question. Someone anonymously asked in the Q&A, how do you deal with hierarchy groups stopping new people from joining?
This is one of my favorite questions, actually. This happens all over the place. So quite typically in sport, you have a bunch of old mates who have been at the club since 1986 and know everything about it, and we've tried everything, nothing will change. I guess my answer to that is it comes down to human management, really. And I would divide and conquer. I would be saying, okay, well, as a group, I can't convince you as a group because this group, the whole group theory will come in and people will back each other of the majority view. But what I would be saying is really approach it one person at a time. Find that one person that has time to have a conversation and then really work in with them around what you're trying to do. Get two people. Ask them who they can introduce you to as a third person. So divide and conquer is probably the first and best strategy that I can give you in that space, but I'm more than happy to have this conversation offline because this is something that comes up all the time. Sport, recreation, community, absolutely all the time because it's a huge impact, I guess. And if you're trying to change culture, it needs to work from bottom up and top down as well. So it's important that you have leadership buy-in, but it's also important that you've got some groundswell. Great question.
I think that's all we have time for, Denver. So I think we should move on to the last slide.
Excellent. So what can you do specifically? So let's look at this. Distribute a head, heart, hand survey to your members. If you've not developed one and you don't have the time to put it into a nice, pretty template, contact us because we've got all of that ready to go. Analyze the volunteer roles based on knowledge, skill, and passion. So if you're looking for a treasurer, what type of knowledge does that person need to have? What type of skills do they need to have? What type of passion would that person likely have as well? Understand those and really sell those elements, not the actual treasurer role as such, to that community. Utilize the bees of connection, and I think that's a really, really simple, easy to understand approach that will hold you in good stead, whether you're at a P&C level, whether you're at a law firm, or whether you're anywhere in that mix as well. All right, if there isn't anything else, we're right on time. So I recognise it is a short webinar today, but we really valued the opportunity to be with you today. Our contact details are on the screen now, but I think Jehu also has a survey for you that he's going to put into the chat function. So if you wouldn't mind taking 60 seconds just to fill out a quick survey, that would be great for us as well. Thank you so much.